Welcome, everyone, to a conversation about the current scam center crisis that seems to be gaining traction in the news all over the world. You know, traffickers have always compelled victims to engage in unlawful activity. The most obvious example would be sex traffickers requiring people to sell commercial sex when it might be illegal in a country, but also violating laws of larceny, stealing, theft, identity theft, assaulting other survivors. They've typically done this as part of their operations, but they've also used criminality as part of their means of coercion, causing people to commit crimes and then using that as a way to say, you have to keep doing what I say because you've done these unlawful things. And it also has caused people to be afraid to go to the authorities and seek help because they're afraid they're going to get arrested for what their traffickers compelled them to do. So forced criminality isn't something new. However, there is a group of traffickers that seems to have found a new expression in this form of human trafficking, and they're doing it at scale. And that brings us to the scam centers that are popping up around the world. And so we're delighted that you have joined us today for this conversation. My name is John Richmond, and I serve with EverFree, which seeks to resource and accelerate the fight against sex trafficking and exploitation. EverFree does this by connecting effective leaders and organizations around a strategic framework that increases measurable impact. Over 125 organizations have joined the EverFree network, where they receive support, resources, contacts, and funding opportunities. And there are several EverFree network members who have been working in Myanmar, Thailand, throughout Africa and Asia. They've been involved in all aspects of the scam center issue, from victim identification to repatriation and survivor care. And as part of its mission, EverFree delights in hosting conversations like the one we're going to have today. There is going to be some question and answer time at the end, so feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we'll try to answer as many as possible. I want you to know that my experience with scam centers is limited, so consider me a curious learner along with you in this conversation. But we are fortunate to have several experts with us today. The first is Jake Sims. Jake is a visiting fellow at Harvard University's Asia Center. He's been an advisor to government agencies, think tanks, and NGOs around the world trying to address transnational crime, rights, security issues, particularly in Southeast Asia. His analysis and commentary is regularly featured in global media outlets, thought leadership forums, and a monthly column that you guys can follow in The Diplomat. Through his publications, research, and on-the-ground efforts, and his masterful networking skills, he's become one of the global leaders in scam centers. There are probably few people in the world who see this issue from as many different perspectives as Jake. We also have Mechelle Moore, who is an expert in anti-human trafficking and internet and transnational crime, with a focus on forced criminality, cyber slavery, and online scams in the Pacific region. So expertise exactly in the area that we're talking about today. She's the Chief Executive Officer of Global Alms, where she leads initiatives in trauma-informed care and emergency support for trafficking victims and gender-based violence survivors. She spends most of her time on the Myanmar border working with scam center survivors and helping them return to their home countries. We also have Helen Amutuhaire from Uganda. Helen's the head of programs and strategy for EverFree Uganda. She's an attorney and skilled advocate with experience caring for human trafficking survivors, both in the residential and non-residential contexts. And EverFree is currently, under Helen's leadership and the rest of the EverFree team, caring for scores of scam center survivors who've made it home to Uganda. And so EverFree has invited this distinguished group for a conversation about the current scam center crisis. But more than a series of speeches, we really invited them to ask questions of each other, highlighting areas of agreement, and even willing to disagree about perspectives on issues. And we recognize that this is a complicated and textured environment. There are no easy answers, and we're not going to cover all the information today. Yet the drive for freedom and justice and human dignity warrants a robust conversation. So let me start with this, just an overview. Jake, could you help orient us to, when people talk about the scam center crisis, what are they referring to? What do we need to know as a general framework to start our conversation?
Sure. Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. Thanks to Atlas Free for hosting this. It's important to keep talking about this conversation. And yeah, I mean, in terms of like what this is, particularly from a trafficking lens, this is a form of trafficking that, let's say 4 years ago, nobody in the world had heard of. And so we're all sort of being introduced as experts here, but like our expertise is frankly quite limited, because yeah, even the people here, I think I started working on this in 2021. It sort of became an issue in Myanmar, Thai border, like 2022, and that's like the longest people have. So, but effectively, what you have is foreign nationals, initially from mostly mainland China, but then around the Southeast Asia region, and now all over the world, are being trafficked via fraudulent recruitment ads on social media through friends, agents, broker networks in their home countries, and a variety of other sources to highly militarized compounds, predominantly, but not exclusively, in Cambodia, Myanmar, and Laos. Also, there's sort of sizable scam compound sort of infrastructure in the Philippines, in Dubai. You're starting to see this pop up in other countries around the world, as far flung as Mexico, Peru, East Europe, East and West Africa. Um, and effectively, they are being forced, under threat of torture, violence, death, even, to conduct an array of very sophisticated fraud schemes against fraud victims from all over the world. And so, in terms of the different modalities of human trafficking that we work on, and that the people on this call work on, you could look at this. One, over the last 4 years, it's gone from unknown to perhaps the fastest growing and densest concentration of human trafficking victims anywhere in the world, right? And lacks the infrastructure, the response, the government awareness, long-running expertise. So you're reliant on experts that have looked at it for 3 or 4 years, instead of 20 or 30, like other forms of trafficking. But it also has the advantage, you could say, against a response, that as opposed to other forms of human trafficking, the criminals here are far more sophisticated. The type of crime that's being conducted by the trafficking victims is far more lucrative. And the level of protection that the actual locations of the trafficking have are far stronger, than anything else really we have ever seen before. And so it's just operating on a very, very different level to other forms of trafficking, and it's growing because of its profitability. It's growing at a really astonishing rate. And that is the trafficking side of sort of situating this. And trafficking, frankly, is only a small component of the broader criminal ecosystem that makes up this phenomenon. So, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, I appreciate that context. The fact that it is so sophisticated and militarized, I feel like it really differentiates it from other types of trafficking we think of. Mitch, when you think about trafficking, what is the profile of a typical scam center victim, if there is one?
I mean, we have profiles, but they're very broad. So our youngest victim has been 14 and our oldest victim has been 58. So when you're looking at the age range there, it's quite significant. Generally, they're in their 20 to 30s, but depending on where they come from, they will take anyone generally who can operate a computer, read, write, and speak English, depending on the target market of that company that's recruiting. So if they're targeting Western English-speaking countries, they'll look for people who can read, write, and speak English. If they're targeting, say, Vietnam or China or maybe Malaysia or Singapore, they'll be looking for people, well, not Singapore, but they'll be looking for people who speak that local language. So there is a little bit of a difference between the victim profile for Myanmar and Cambodia and Laos. Myanmar, the majority of victims do have higher education backgrounds, so they'd have some form of degree or advanced education. The majority of our victims have had bachelor's or master's as a minimum. They are generally fresh out of university. If they're a little bit older, it might be their second or third career attempt, and it's because of retention or different economic vulnerabilities in their region. They are from all over the world, so there's not one country that's trafficked the most over another. They do have different countries that would have a greater number at different times, but we've not found one specific country that has been targeted over any other in terms of numbers. What else? There are more males than females. So we've got like 77% of our victims have been male and the rest female. But yeah, the majority are male adults who have an educated background. Laos and Cambodia, so I have a counterpart, Ling, she works in Cambodia. The majority of their victims have actually been uneducated from poorer areas. So it just depends on the location of the scamming compound and then the companies that are operating within those compounds to the people that they'll be targeting.
Wow. So a little bit different than the typical profile of the trafficking victim we think about in terms of college educated and things of that nature. Jay, do we have a sense of the scope of this? How many people do we think are currently being trapped in scam centers?
Yeah, it's an ongoing sort of moving target estimation. I think your sort of most recent scale estimates for the populations inside would be somewhere around 150,000 in Cambodia alone. That's coming from USAID's 2024 data. I think the most recent I've seen in Myanmar is 120,000, but it could easily be higher than that significantly. Laos, 80 to 100,000. And so just in those three countries alone, you're like, what, like 350,000 at least. And then, when you add up the other countries where there are smaller compound landscapes, you could be looking somewhere north of 500,000 just in the region. And again, those are probably conservative numbers just because these again are highly protected, difficult to access. And not to say 100% of those people are victims, though there are widespread reports of victimization across all three countries. And I also think if you're talking about scale, and one of the reasons I think this has gotten so much attention, outside the craziness and the sophistication and the brutal violence, is the fact that if you look at like what is the likely revenue generating from this industry, in each of those contexts, you're looking at just in those three countries, somewhere between $50 and $75 billion a year, in terms of like sort of best upstream, downstream estimations. And those scale estimates, again, are quite rough. But if that's even close to accurate, this would be the largest economic engine in the entire Mekong subregion. And so like that's again something that's pretty unprecedented in terms of human trafficking industries. Outside of what we know to be, if you look at the drug trade, we know that there's large numbers of low agency, potentially labor trafficked people working in that space as well. But we don't have the same illumination and the drug space as we do here because forced drug mules, forced drug cultivators aren't being given 10 cell phones. And so we have this benefit of being able to at least a little bit more accurately say like, okay, where are these places? How many people are being exploited? What are they doing? How much money are they making? Because of the courageous testimony of scam victims coming out, of trafficking victims coming out of these compounds.
And just to be clear, because I want to make sure I appreciate this, you said 60 to 75 billion with a B.
Billion. Yeah.
It
And
just
put that in perspective, that would be like close to 50%, equivalent to close to 50% of the GDP of those three countries. So this is the biggest game in town, at least for Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos. And you look at the regional tentacles of it, it's a major regional industry.
Wow, it's incredible. And we're waiting on Helen to get to a place where she can operate on video. Oh, Helen, you are there. Wonderful. We heard a little bit the profile of the typical victim, someone who's college educated, someone who speaks English, someone who's going to be able to go into one of these centers and effectively run a scam on individuals somewhere else in the world. Can you tell us from so many victims have come from Uganda that you have served? How were the victims that you've gotten to know recruited into the scam centers? How did they first hear about it? How did they end up moving from Kampala or wherever they were in Uganda up into Myanmar, Cambodia, and end up in these centers?
Thank you so much, John, and thank you to my fellow panelists. So, like Mechelle has said, a lot of the victims are educated, which is really, really different. And we have a lot of men as well. And each of them, it's slightly unique on how they've been recruited, but the majority have had those that are semi-illiterate, those that have maybe their master's degrees or they've finished their undergrad degrees, that's different. But the ones that know English and maybe have just finished college, a lot of them, it is from a WhatsApp group. So they got a text from a WhatsApp group and then they were followed up personally. Then the gentlemen that were educated, a lot of them were approached through their fellow friends who are outside, but there is a friend following up individually on the educated, finding them where they were in the workspaces. We even have one that was, someone was in the bank and they just reached out to them that gone to the bank and they just talked to them, how is life? How are you doing after education? I've not seen you after school. And then they're telling them about all these opportunities. And that's why even now when we look at their freedom life maps, when we're talking about priorities, a lot of them are still in shock. Like I knew, I was educated. I've gone, some have been outside the country before, they've worked externally before. So they didn't think it was a scam because it was really well packaged and they had the illusion of they knew so much so they wouldn't be, scammed again. Yeah, but through friends, through WhatsApp groups, targeted in corporate spaces where they were working prior to being trafficked. Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah.
And it makes so much sense. The desire to shift and move for a better job, for an opportunity for your family is a good and noble motive. Like it's really the fault not of them for being recruited, but for the lies that are told by the traffickers. Mish, I wanted to ask you a bit. We hear so much about that most of the victims are men, but not all. Many victims are women. We've also heard that there's a lot of just sexual violence within the compounds, as well as sextortion as part of the scam center for people in the West, and the selling of online, in a sense, online sex trafficking that's also going on. Can you share a little bit about those details and how it's both forced labor and sex trafficking involved?
Yeah, so we've had a great number of victims come out who have been or have experienced gender-based violence crimes as well as being trafficked. Male and female, not just female, but the majority have been female. There are several scamming compounds that will force victims to sleep with their dormitory rooms open. And because they're sleeping during the day, they're working at night. Not everybody who is in your room will always be there all the time, because if you have to work overtime or for whatever reason. And there are men who will roam up and down the halls specifically looking for women to sexually assault and rape. So if they find a lone female or maybe two females in a room, then they will go in and try and assault them. Now, these are not bosses of the company. They're not supervisors. They are their fellow victims. So other men who have been trafficked who are now preying on other female victims. There used to be a protection clause for women that companies would actively put in the fake contracts that they would make them sign. At some scamming compounds, or the majority now, that is not the case. It's kind of like a free-for-all now. So the way that the companies are operating and the compounds are run has changed over time, which is very unfortunate, because now you're not only having to worry about being trafficked, and maybe sexually exploited by your boss or your supervisor. Now you're worried about the guy or the girl sitting next to you that could then be preying on you, and you don't feel safe anywhere. When it comes to sextortion, I can't speak to that. I don't have links to that, but there has been also a lot of sexual exploitation within compounds. There's several that have brothels, KTVs. There is the threat that they hang over your head as a female. If you don't reach your financial targets for this month, we'll send you to the brothel and you can make your money on your back. And then that repays the debt. So you don't actually get any money, but you'll go and work as a sex worker, and all of the money that is made from that will then go to your boss. So that is the threat that they hang over females' heads. The other one is organ donation, organ farming, harvesting. So they would say to you, if you don't meet your targets this month, I'm going to send you and we're going to take your kidneys, or we're going to go and sell you to someone else and they're going to harvest all your organs and you're going to go and die. So there is not enough education around organ harvesting and organ trafficking to understand what that process entails. But that is a very real threat that they hang over victims' heads, and then they have to live with that constant fear.
Sounds like what an incredible climate of fear that people are under when all those different threats are simultaneously being made.
That psychological torture is just, it's next level.
Absolutely. No, I imagine that there's a lot of folks that are listening to this who are in the United States, in Europe, in the West, maybe who are the targets of scams, who might be wondering right now, what scams are being run? Like what might they see in their email or on their phone that might be generated by a scam center? Do you have a sense of, and this is for anyone, do you have a sense of what are the scams that are being run, and how could people in the West protect themselves from that?
The general scams that are run out of the scamming compounds, there's a few of them, but the typical one or the most popular is the romance scam. So where you have victims forced to go online and pretend to be a female, and then you're trolling for numbers and profiles, or you're on a dating site and you're trying to fish for links and connections, and then you move the person off that platform into a WhatsApp or a Telegram so you can then chat with them offline. That's probably the most popular one in this region. There's also online shopping, there's real estate investment, then there's just online investment in general. So, but the main one that we've been dealing with has been the romance scam, because it's the easiest one to, or the most, I would say the most probably experienced one to hook people in. It's easy. Since COVID, people are very lonely, they crave connection, so it's easier to hook people in online through a personal connection and then into the investment scam.
Yeah. That's just to back that up, I mean, that's basically what we've seen is the dominant form, and like the term gets thrown around that's now like going out of vogue, but pig butchering or shit, it comes from the Chinese word shezupan. And that sort of word is affiliated frequently with this industry, and it is a romance scam, but it's sort of a mutation on a romance scam, where in the past romance scams were traditionally like, you think you're in a relationship and then the person asks for money. In this case, like generally they're not like asking for money. It's a very long con melding of a romance scam and a highly sophisticated investment scam, where you get deep into the relationship and you think you trust the person, and then they start talking about how they've made their money in crypto, and then they're having you download apps on legitimate platforms that there's backends into, and you think you're investing in crypto and making money. And then when you go to take it out, you can't. And it's even more complex than that. But many of these scams, and one of the reasons, in an age of AI, where probably lots of scam typologies around the world are starting to automate, where you still see like the need for massive numbers of captive coerced labor, is because these things take a long time. And they're oftentimes so sophisticated. This isn't just one person that takes you end to end. You have this looks like a sales floor. Like you have lead generators and you have people who are increasing the size of the deal and you have closers and like they're A/B testing their scripts all the time. And it's just like it's getting better and better and better, which is one reason that the Southeast Asia scam phenomenon hasn't just gone the way of the Nigerian prince. Like this isn't just one script that they're just throwing out in mass. It's a very sophisticated, it really does look much more like a sales operation than a scam. And so yes, romance scams, but this is romance like next gen romance scams like the world has never seen before, and that's why it's so effective.
John,
Yes, please, Helen.
the other part is that whereas typically you would know that there is someone scamming the other people, now both the victim and the other person they're approaching are being scammed. So that two people are being scammed, the target audience is not the ideal of what we're targeting. Like there is a certain audience that we're targeting to get money from, but they're also targeting victims to scam them and bring them to do the work. So it will also come as job ads. It will come as pop-ups of these different things, where everyone is being scammed. It's a double scam for two people, the one scamming and the one being scammed. That's one of the commonalities we found, that they're not just targeting to take things from just an ordinary person that is just maybe not as tech savvy, or even those that are tech savvy, but they're also targeting to scam victims and bring them aboard.
It's such an important point, Helen, that it's a double scam. The scam on the person who's conducting the scam and a scam on the target, the mark, in a sense, who's being scammed. It's really helpful. Now, I wonder if the financial transactions isn't a threat into this. As money is moved, is often a point of weakness in these operations, and it highlights that trafficking has always been about money. It's always been economically motivated crime in every expression. Are there ways to trace the movement of money as a way to unravel what's happening in these centers?
There are ways, and I mean I'm not going to give the authoritative answer on this. I'm sure my colleagues will have thoughts here, but there are ways, and especially because this is a lot of the transactions, not all, but a lot of them are moving through various cryptocurrencies. Ultimately, a lot of that is in the public domain. But there are both sophisticated ways of obscuring where the money is going. And then there's another dynamic that we haven't really started talking about yet, and that is the profoundly compromised environments in which these scam operations have started to move between. And so a frequent mode of the exit of the money is you're scammed through a variety of maybe a certain cryptocurrency, and then it gets moved to a number of other cryptocurrencies and then exits at a exchange with a low threshold, like near no identity needed crypto exchange in Cambodia, which is a dollarized economy. And I mean, there are constant reports in Cambodia of people with little to no identification rolling up in SUVs and walking away with millions of dollars in cash, that then they have the ability to deposit with little to no questions being asked into the formal Cambodian financial system, which is itself become effectively a hollow vessel for the laundering of this money. And so it's like, yes, there are ostensibly like weak points, vulnerabilities as this industry touches the formal financial sector, but frequently it's touching the formal financial sector in countries where this is a dominant economic concern of the ruling elite. And Cambodia is the sort of paradigmatic example of that, where you have this being like a key source of revenue that is propping up the Cambodian government. It looks different in Myanmar and Laos, but even still, the point remains that the place where a lot of these transactions are occurring are highly degraded rule of law environments where the most powerful actors are inherently and like deeply involved in co-perpetrating the crime. And so a lot of that, like a lot of the traditional AML, KYC stuff that is helpful in other counter human trafficking spaces is still really needed, and we need innovations, and we need there's things that can be done, but there are also severe limitations because of how compromised these operating environments are.
Wow. So one of the things that we think about a lot in other forms of trafficking is we think about these three Ps that kind of were there at the beginning of the trafficking movement in 2000 around prosecution, protection, and prevention. We've talked a little bit about kind of the overall piece, but when it comes to accountability, when it comes to prosecution, when it comes to governments actually trying to enforce laws against the traffickers that are recruiting and grooming and coercing these individuals, have we seen any notable efforts? And if not, what are the roadblocks to that? Meech, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, I was just speaking to the Filipino embassy earlier today, and they were telling me how they've got some traffickers that have been prosecuted and are now in jail for life. Recently, they've got 4 or 5. We, as an NGO, have been passing intel packets through DSI and other contacts we have in international law enforcement agencies to go after recruiters that we come across. And so then they've been arrested and convicted in different countries around the world, which has been great. That is a tiny drop in the ocean, though, because when no one's going after the big bosses, no one's going after the people actually perpetuating these crimes. And there's a lack of coordinated effort across all countries, really. There is an emergency response network that has been put together by UNODC that incorporates international law enforcement agencies from within Southeast Asia, but that's just starting. That doesn't include any other nations that are victims of financial scams either. So there's no one coordinated body or even small coordinated bodies going after the big bosses who are actually perpetuating these crimes. The other problem is we don't always necessarily have the data to be able to identify who to go after. So we have some people in the crosshairs in terms of there's different generals in the ethnic armed groups. There's been a lot of talk around Xi and his people. But when you're talking about, I think we've got almost 60 compounds along the Myanmar border. There's several that have new compounds that are being built in Cambodia right now, and hundreds of scamming centers over there. You have new compounds being built here today, right now. There's 5 under construction down south. There was another one started last week. All of those compounds, they don't have the same boss. They are all started by different investment groups. They are all controlled by different compound directors. They have 30 to 40 companies in each compound, and they all have their own company directors. Some companies are registered, some are not. But this system or ecosystem is so disjointed. You've got so many different people to go after and no data on where to start. We have a lot of data from victims who have come out of the scamming compounds, but when you're looking at enough information to be able to verify and put together an investigation, and then to have someone to go after and prosecute, and to be able to locate those people, that is not it's not a piece of work that's been done right now. Jake, do you have any more info on that?
Yeah, I mean that's to me that would sum up my exact understanding at even greater detail than I get in on the Myanmar case. I don't think that's the main challenge in Cambodia though. It looks a little bit different there, and yeah, but also would say like the Philippines are a success story on some level, not an absolute one. There's caveats and problems with their response, but they've gone from being a major host to a place where there are scam compounds still all over the country, but they're small and they're ad hoc and they're moving around and trying to evade capture and law enforcement. You don't see 2,000, 10,000 person compounds in the Philippines anymore. So that's good. It's a good model. Indonesia, like the Philippines, has also arrested a number of brokers and traffickers. Again, there's problematic elements to the Indonesian response. In Cambodia, though, this idea that we don't know who's doing it and who owns the compounds and who's running things, that's the case in Myanmar. In generally speaking, that is not the case in Cambodia. Like Meech said, there's like over 300 compounds. The vast majority of them we actually know from Cambodia's own cadastral and corporate records who owns and operates the activities happening in these. And these are the most powerful people in the ruling elite. You have deputy prime ministers, family members of the prime minister, cabinet level advisors to the prime minister, senators, governors, like on and on and on. And so it's not a lack of evidence. It's not a lack of knowledge about who's in charge and who's principally culpable as perpetrators. Certainly there's more evidence needed, but it's much more about needed political will, because for those of you who know Cambodia, it's a very economically depressed country. There's really only one remaining legitimate industry to speak of, and that's the garment industry, which is about to be tariffed out of existence. And then Cambodia has this massive, wholly tariff-proof industry of slave-fueled scams. And we know exactly who owns those compounds and who's benefiting from them. But when that is the prime minister's family and friends and allies and business partners, the rule of law environment in Cambodia is not such that can be effectively countered without really, really significant and sustained international pressure, which we've just not seen yet.
Well, you all paint a picture of a very high reward enterprise with a very low amount of risk to it. And from a criminal law standpoint, that's exactly the opposite of what we're looking for. We want high risk, low reward crimes in order to keep them low. And it sounds like political influence and political will matter a great deal as well. One thing I wanted to highlight, Helen, if you could help us understand that the victims that EverFree has been caring for in Uganda for so many years and so effectively, this group of individuals coming out of the scam centers feels like a different community of people, from college educated and they need different types of care. How has EverFree, a very reputable anti-trafficking organization that's been caring for survivors for a long time, how have you had to adapt to effectively care for this new group of people who are differently situated?
Thank you so much, John. Indeed, they are a different batch, and I cannot say that we figured this 100% because it is again unique to each person. Some people we figured it out to the extent of how much they've opened up to share, but I think generally the new technique to this group that we're using is upfront talk about safe migration. Like even when we're talking about counseling, we are embedding career guidance throughout. We are looking at digital literacy throughout this communication with them, because we've had a big realization that they are likely to be re-trafficked. A big bunch of them have had loans back home when they were leaving. And while Jack and Mitch were speaking, actually into the previous question, I was thinking of there has to be need to push for, bilateral and regional multilateral cooperation and investigative, way to prosecute transnational crimes, because a lot of our people were not trafficked from here. We have some of them that were picked from Nairobi, some were picked from Tanzania and then brought back. There is like a regional network that you see. And when they come in, because they sold a lot of their properties, they sold everything they had at home, they have loans back home, they do not want to go back home. So the conversation now, even when we know their health should be prioritized for most of them, it is ticked as a priority. One of the priority things that has gone up is career guidance, is safe migration. If they're likely to go back, how can we equip them? How do we deal with this? The other part that has been interesting with these cases that have been brought on is you're teaching them, but you also, or as an organization, we also have to be very careful. We have to be very tech savvy, because they have this knowledge. They're traumatized. You can also be part of the victims. It's just how they are set up, and it can be a traumatic response. This is how they know how to protect themselves now. A lot of them have been brainwashed. They look at this as a new skill set. So how we talk to them, it is engaging the team and reminding them every day, especially the case managers that work on this. to be alert, to also look at digital literacy as something that they have to be careful about as they talk on these victims. One of the mistakes could be, or you listen to these stories and you're very touched and you say, now this person is educated, they're good at what they do, should we give them a job? There are many organizations that could take them on, but we have to be much more careful now and train even the people that are going to help them, because these guys have a lot of ideas that they've learned, and there is need to reset a lot of the mindset that they have. So yeah, I think summarily targeting digital literacy, career guidance, safe migration for them, because we fear that they're likely to go back because of the conditions they have. They're adults, and the adults that have sold a lot of their property before they left, but also the adults that have these skills at hand, skills that can be dangerous. We've taken them through some legal trainings on what are the repercussions, what does this mean for you if you do it here. And we're also talking to government now and saying, we can't only look at this as a cyber crime. We can't continuously say, when it comes to digital, it's a cyber crime. It is also a human trafficking crime that has to be looked at like this. And we can't lazily just say, oh, these are cyber crimes. A lot of the government people that we had in the room on this, the discussion is, but is this the place we need to take this conversation? So you're like, yes, it's both. It's a cyber crime, it's immigration violation, but it's also a human trafficking issue. And it has to be addressed like that, and it has to be penalized like that. Yeah.
It's so helpful to think about it as part of each one of those subcategories of crime. It covers all of them. And I understand, Helen, that many of some of the victims that you've been caring for have returned from the scam centers, having become pregnant while they were being exploited in the scam centers, either through survivor-on-survivor sexual violence that Meech mentioned, or perhaps through something one of the bosses did. How has that complicated or created challenges for you in caring for survivors?
So for the ladies that come pregnant, it has been part of our programming to care for children of survivors that we call dependents on the program. So we have tools and systems in place to care for that. The only issue now is the mentality that even when we've been dealing with the survivors of human trafficking that come with children of perpetrators who could be several, maybe they are also survivors who have impregnated them, or for the Myanmar cases, it could be an issue of punishment. We still have opportunities and systems in place to take care of them. I think the only issue is the rushing to go back. Because a lot of the women that we've heard, even when we say we have opportunities to take care of this child, you have to be here and walk the journey with both the mother and the child. These cases from the scam centers is that they want to be up and moving. They don't want to stop. It's like a train that is fast. So even as a team, we're working fast. We've been forced to work faster to check in with them, even much more like we check on other people. And because they're adults, there's a certain brokenness that when you're dealing with human trafficking survivors that adults go through. The sense of healing is longer, but you have to accept to first settle down and we walk this journey with you. Now, a lot of these cases do not have the element of let's settle down. It's an element of what next? Anything else doesn't matter, what next? And of course, that is with the anger, with the betrayal and the disappointment of I thought I knew better, and now I'm in this space. Now what do I do? Yeah.
We have a number of questions that folks have sent in. I want to get to those, but before we do, there was a case in February that Mechelle was just explaining to me. Over 9,000 victims in one case have been now identified. It feels overwhelming. Like when I first heard about this February case, I almost thought this has been sensationalized, someone's exaggerating, until you dig into it and realize that indeed over 9,000 people have come out just in one intervention. Given the stark scope and scale of this, the hiddenness of it, the military protections, the political influence, what gives you guys hope? You've invested your lives in working on this. You've put yourselves at risk. You're traveling extensively from your families. You're living in difficult environments. What sustains you? What gives you hope about this situation to stay involved? And let me start with you, Meech, and then go to Jake and Helen.
Oh Lord, what gives me hope? Not a lot right now. Unfortunately, with the 9,500 and what is it, 9,353, that number is significant, yes. And I'm very happy for those victims who got out of the scamming compound, and almost all of them now, there's less than 50, I think, left, have been repatriated. So the last groups are coming in now. We just had 19 Filipinos today. Although that's a significant number, it's a drop in the ocean. And the way that that went down, it was reported as a crackdown on the scamming compounds, which was a total farce. So that was in response to pressure from China, and then Thai authorities issuing arrest warrants for a couple of the generals in the ethnic armed groups. And then they panicked and in a rash decision went in and started pulling victims out of companies in scamming compounds in an effort to show that they were not complicit in having the compounds in their territories, not benefiting from it. Both groups, DKBA and BGF, both put out statements at the time. And once they started, so CSOs and embassies submitted lists. And once they started pulling people out, we all thought that you could just submit a list and get everyone on the list out. What they did is they went to companies and said, give us your dead wood, who's not performing. And so they took all the people out that either weren't performing or weren't meeting their targets, put them into holding camps, and then they've been funneled through and eventually repatriated home through the government to government process. But there are thousands still trapped in there with no significant plan on how to get them out. And right now, there is no willingness for any of the ethnic armed groups to do any of that again, because it's one, cost them a lot of time, a big headache with Thailand, and a lot of money. So they don't want to do that process again, which leaves us to go back to what we were doing before, which was negotiating to get 2 or 3 people out at a time, having victims escape, so jump out of windows and over walls and escape through gates with armed guards, or pay ransoms. There isn't any other option right now. So I don't have a lot of hope right now. I don't think this will be solved in my lifetime. But I definitely know that until other countries come on board and start collaborating together to work together towards developing a plan to address this, it's just going to keep growing and getting larger and larger. Jake, you've got to say something positive, because I've just
yeah, I mean, I feel
everyone's.
that. I'll say too, like, just like on a day-to-day basis, I was based in Cambodia for a number of years and cannot travel there anymore. But I am given hope daily, because I get to, less actually with Meech and her crew on the Mesop border, but daily get to interact with the people who are leading that response in Cambodia. And it's not your regular actors in the counter trafficking space. It's none of the big names that you know. Yeah, some of those groups have gotten big grants, but the real on the ground work is almost exclusively being done by this like group of highly deinstitutionalized, unfunded, ad hoc workers, and that isn't like hopeful strategically. But I get to hang out with those people virtually and when they leave Cambodia on a regular basis, and they're just some of the most courageous people I've ever met. They're doing exceptional work under the most ridiculous circumstances potentially of any counter trafficking responders in the entire world. Ling's name obviously comes up. There are a few others, but most of them, frankly, the ones who are doing the most impactful work, you just can't name. Um, and that makes them, because they're unseen, it's hard to fund them. And that's something I'm sort of working on and motivated by, but just getting to interact with them and being a part of that movement truly is what it is from its beginning to now, and to just see that like there's people still committed to it is really hopeful for me. And then I think more like big picture, what gives me hope from more of like a pragmatic sense is like, look, like everyone on this call would care about human trafficking victims regardless of what they were doing, but the universe of care for human trafficking victims is limited. It's fixed. There's just a number of people that are going to care about issues out of altruism or whatever is driving them to do that. And this issue transcends that. And so there are people who ordinarily do not care or may pay lip service, but don't really care about trafficking victims who are tuned into this and whose self-interest is impacted by it. And so you have basically really powerful constituencies all over the world who it is now in their self-interest. Their interest is now aligned with that of trafficking victims like the ones that Helen and Meech are talking about that my friends deal with on a daily basis. That's important. It's also the case that this has profound, even beyond like the powerful constituents, it has profound security implications for governments all over the world. We haven't gotten into that side of things, but ordinarily, like the best hope I would have for a champion on an issue like this would be someone like John or Cindy, his successor. But within the US government today, even though there's huge problems with how the US government is responding, the potential interest in this issue far exceeds the mandate of the tip office. And actually, the tip office probably only plays a small part in the ultimate response to this. And that's the case in lots of countries all over the world. And so while I completely agree with Meech that this is not going to be solved in our lifetime, and you look at the only comparable is the war on drugs, which has been being waged for 100 years, and it's a bigger problem today than it used to be. This is harder to root out than the war on drugs. So this is going to be around for a long time. But you also have major actors in seats of power and influence that have a reason to care about this. And hopefully, given that this has emerged from a trafficking response, hopefully, as opposed to the war on drugs, which is it's a very sad story in terms of how people on the bottom have been impacted. Hopefully, there's going to continue to be a seat at the table for people who have a rights lens on this issue and are focused on the people who are actually stuck at the bottom of this. So those are some maybe like strategic reasons to be hopeful.
Helen, what gives you hope?
Yeah, there is some hope. Mitch, you've made me sad, but there is some hope. And my hope is that like digital fraud undermines economies. Like it will erode trust. It has started to. I see new people asking about trafficking since these scam compounds have been raided. The new people we completely did not think about, and they're starting to say, wait, what? That's trafficking, that's part of it, because they are looking at their economies being undermined. In these, like no country is immune, and we've seen that some of the perpetrators and the victims span from like 30 nationalities. So it's starting to look like a global issue. Trafficking has been a global issue, but you have so many people centering it to small spaces. And now with this raid, we've seen people looking at it as a global issue. My other hope is also, for the first time in the world, we've been picking victims of trafficking and coordinating around them here in Uganda. This time around, specifically with the Myanmar cases, we had to be on board, all of us. We had Interpol, we had the Criminal Investigative Department, we had NGOs sitting in one space, one quorum, working on an issue, a thing we've been asking for. Now, it doesn't look... it's not as pragmatic, but it's also not looking at the bigger numbers that Mitch is talking about. But when I look at the smaller numbers that are back home, and for us who care for survivors, you start to look at trafficking from a single survivor perspective. And when you see one person rescued, even when you know there are thousands, you know this person is here and is rebuilding their lives. There is a lot of peer network. And if we can also pivot a lot of work into survivor care, equipping them, they go back, each of them, even the ones that we're talking to, knows other 70 people. That has been the thing. Each person was giving us lists and lists and lists of colleagues that are still there, which is heartbreaking. But also we are able, if governments strategize around this, we know people that are there. We have a place to start. We're not in the dark as we've been in. So I have a little hope that it's a start of some people paying attention in certain governments that they had not, because of how big this issue has been. Now, when I look at the big issue in itself, we might not fix it in our lifetime, Mitch, but we definitely are fixing a part of it. I'm hopeful around that.
Well, I appreciate those answers. And you've answered a few of the questions. One, someone asked about how survivors escape. And I think, Meech, you mentioned that, kind of jumping over walls, climbing fences, ransoming their way out. But another question was, what has driven some of the success in the Philippines? Why has that been a better effort than what we've seen in Cambodia and Myanmar? A quick response on that with just a few minutes left?
Yeah, political will. You know, the institution under which scam compounds existed in a state sanctioned way in the Philippines is called the POGOs, and that was instituted by the former regime. The Marcos regime has sort of been like antagonistic towards that from the beginning, and it has become a sort of domestic concern in the Philippines, and just frankly, like the situation of rule of law in the Philippines is just far different from what it looks like in the primary hotspot country. So it's just a very, very different environment that, you know, was always probably going to be the easiest, quote unquote, to crack down on. And even still, you know, there's lots of issues. But it's just the Philippines government is oriented differently to the industry, and the Philippine people also have more of a voice in the direction of that government. So I think those are some of the probably some of the
I think we have time for one more. Meech, what policies, maybe even incremental policies, could Western governments or governments from sending countries implement that might make some sort of impact?
Policies. I think when you're talking about countries who are being scammed, their involvement is really going to be critical in this process. They're going to need to engage on a very large scale to be able to stop this. So you're going to have governments, one, willing to participate and acknowledging that it is actually a problem. On the other side of that, though, when you're talking about prevention of human trafficking, you also have to have governments acknowledge that it's a problem. Because while there are very active governments and embassies around the world trying to support their citizens from coming out of these scamming compounds, you also have a lot of governments with the attitude and opinion that you got yourself into this, you need to get yourself out. So the willingness to prevent the human trafficking piece of it is not there. Now, that's not every country. There are several like that. But I think there needs to be policies put in place that address things like digital literacy, understanding that this is a global issue, and that there are several prevention mechanisms that could be put in place in those countries to prevent, like, to protect their own citizens from human trafficking, let alone being financially scammed.
That's super helpful. Some digital literacy policies might be helpful in educating. I mean, I think that goes to what Helen mentioned earlier about safe migration as well. Well, this has been a really helpful conversation. I know we just scratched the surface on this, but what a great way to spend an hour on the UN's World Day Against Human Trafficking, just thinking about this issue. I'm grateful to each of you for sharing your perspectives. This has been recorded so that others can enjoy it. And each of the panelists have provided a bunch of really great resources that you'll receive via email after this if you'd like to read more information. And if you're interested in learning more about upcoming conversations, visit atlasfree.org. If you're interested in joining the Atlas Free Network, you can visit the website or email membership@atlasfree.org. And I think I speak for everybody when we say that we want accountability for the traffickers and we want freedom and justice for everyone that's currently suffering in these scam centers. So towards freedom, we will go onward and upward. Thank you all.